Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Don Wash Processed Nicaragua from Sweet Bloom Coffee Roasters. And there's the bag right there. And Sweet Bloom based out of Lakewood, Colorado, and this coffee right here was featured in our most recent blind taste test rankings video, where it finished second place out of 4 Sweet Bloom coffees on that day. And the reason it finished second was because, well, we were really big fans of the washed Ethiopia that was on that table, and even though this one's less our flavor profile than the honey processed was, it was a little bit more enjoyable on that day specifically. So given that the honey processed was the coffee that improved the most from the first time we tried it, it's going to be interesting to see how this coffee compared. This right here is day 20 of this coffee, and it's important. We'll get into that a little bit later. And recipe we have for Sweet Bloom is a 16.67 to 1 water to coffee ratio at 204 degrees Fahrenheit, brewed through the Chemex. This is a light medium American for the roast profile, and let's start discussing this coffee. All right, it's day 6, and that was blind taste test rankings day, and our first impression was pretty solid. So this coffee did finish second, and even though it is a apple pear forward sort of coffee, that's what we were experiencing on that first day, it was a pretty crisp and clean apple and pear that we were experiencing, so it was quite nice and did enjoy it on that first day. Went back day 10, and surprisingly we enjoyed the coffee a little bit less on day 10, as the coffee had a pretty strong fruit acidity, which of course was that noted apple. There was a strong milk chocolate at the higher temperatures before it cooled down, and at cooler temperatures we were getting a slight bit of honey in the cup, but for the most part it was less enjoyable than we had experienced our first go around. Day 12, a significantly better cup on this day, as the apples had become the most dominant flavor in the cup, and the acidity had died down ever so slightly. The honey was a pretty pronounced secondary characteristic. It was the second most honey forward cup of coffee we had experienced since that Guatemala from Calendar Coffee. And then the coffee was just becoming sweeter as a whole, and it was a better cup on this day. And then day 15, by far the best day of the coffee we had had to this point, as the sweetness had increased significantly, and what was once a pretty strong apple acidity had become more of a sweeter apple. It was kind of as if it was a candied apple as opposed to a super tart or a citrusy apple. And the acidity, as mentioned, died down quite a bit, and then it was pretty heavy on the honey at this point, and there was a slight bit of caramel as well. So this darker sweetness that was coming from the cup, and it was a really enjoyable cup on this day. And what we really wanted to note was here on day 20, this is even better than it was on day 15. This is the best day of this coffee by a lot. And what we're experiencing on this day is a really, really strong, really, really pronounced honey. Again, second only to that really honey dominant Guatemala from Calendar we had earlier in the year, and the apple is still really sweet. So this is again, classic Sweet Bloom in the sense that it's a super sweet cup of coffee. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we were getting. All right, and things that will jump out. So the citrus fruit at level 4, and it's always kind of interesting where to put the apple, because even though it's not necessarily the most citrusy apple, it's more of a sweeter apple at this time. It doesn't really belong in the berry or the stone fruit category, so yeah, definitely putting it in the citrus fruit category. Sweetness at level 4, as you'd expect. Acidity is at a level 3, which is higher than any of the other Don coffees. This one, truth be told, is probably a 2.5. On the earlier days, it definitely justifies a 3, but on this day, it's more closely aligned with a 2. That being said, given that it is the most acidic of any of these Don the level 3 is justified at that sense. Cleanliness level 3, yeah, correction, level 4, very clean cup of coffee. Finish, probably about a 3.5. Could even bump that to a 4, but we really like to reserve the 4 for coffees that have the dominant, overly long-lasting finishes. Anything else necessarily worth noting? Not really. Honestly, think that covers the most important parts of this coffee. The caramel, maybe you could have pushed that up to a level 3. Sometimes like to put the honey and the caramel in the same sort of category just to kind of show the sweetness of the cup. But yeah, for the most part, I like the way that this tasting wheel looks even on this day. I think it does kind of undersell how good this cup of coffee actually is. All right, our overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It's kind of interesting because, yeah, just reading the bag, this definitely does not sound like our sort of coffee that we would enjoy. But experiencing this coffee in the way that we had, it really improved dramatically, and we cannot emphasize this enough. Sweet Bloom's coffees might be best being started on day 13, oddly enough, and extending them out even further than we typically do, because starting this coffee on day 6, it wasn't an enjoyable coffee, and on day 10, it was still not necessarily the most enjoyable coffee, even if it did finish second in that blind taste test rankings video. But when you're experiencing this coffee in these later days, day 20, almost 3 weeks out, yeah, it's an entirely different cup of coffee and a significantly better cup of coffee, and something, while not our flavor profile, still enjoyable, almost as enjoyable as that honey processed Don Teo coffee, which was a huge standout for us among those coffees. So again, really impressed, but I guess we shouldn't be surprised at this point, given that Sweet Bloom tends to be our sort of coffee, and they do a really good job of, hitting the mark with certain flavors that we really enjoy. Type of person we would suggest this coffee to: somebody that does like a sweeter apple, because again, we can't mention enough that this is more of a kind of candied apple as opposed to a more tart citric apple as a whole. With that being said, other things, the honey is really pronounced in this cup, so those two flavors specifically, of course, keep in mind that light medium American profile as well. All of those things encapsulated together, we emphasize this a lot. Sweet Bloom does a great job of bringing all those notes out in the way that they do. So this, another really impressive coffee from Sweet Bloom. I think it belongs with so many of their previous coffees. This is again another classic vintage Sweet Bloom coffee right here, so props to Sweet Bloom on this one as well. But we've been gushing about Sweet Bloom too much. I think we're going to leave this video at that. If you've by chance tried the wash process Don Teo, would love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like and subscribe if you're not already subscribed. But this right here has been a review of the Don Teo wash process Nicaragua from Sweet Bloom Coffee. Thank you for watching.